Evelyn sat in her small, dimly lit apartment, the glow of her computer screen casting an eerie light across the room. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the city below barely audible through the cracked window. She had been scrolling mindlessly through the endless notifications and messages that had filled her inbox over the last few hours, but nothing caught her attention. And then she saw it. At first it looked like spam, just another poorly worded invitation from an unknown sender. But something about it stood out. It wasn't the name on the email, Bloodline's Lust. No, it was the subject line. You are one of the chosen. Curiosity gnawed at her as she clicked open the message, her fingers trembling slightly. The words on the screen were simple, chilling, and oddly alluring. Welcome, Evelyn. You have been selected to join a game that has been played for centuries. The rules are simple. Survive the dares, claim the power, and become a master of your own destiny. But beware, the consequences are dire for those who fail. Each dare brings you closer to your true self and farther from the person you once were. Choose wisely, because this game will not only change your life, it will change your very soul. Evelyn read the message again, her heart racing. It sounded ridiculous, impossible even, but something inside her stirred. Something dark, something deep, and something that yearned for more. More power, more control, more desire. She leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The email was certainly bizarre, but there was something about it that felt personal. The tone was seductive, dangerous even. And that phrase, the chosen, struck a nerve. For as long as she could remember, Evelyn had felt like an outsider, a bystander in her own life. She had always played it safe, kept her distance from the darker, more thrilling side of things. But now she was being invited into something that promised excitement, power, and pleasure. There was a link at the bottom of the message. It was simple, just a small underlined phrase. Click here to accept your invitation. Evelyn hesitated. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She was no stranger to dangerous choices, but this felt different. This felt like the kind of choice that could change her forever. A small part of her screamed to delete the message, to walk away. But the other part, the part that had always yearned for more, the part that had craved the thrill of living on the edge, couldn't resist. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. What's the worst that could happen? She clicked the link. The screen blinked black, and for a moment Evelyn thought the whole thing was a prank. But then the text appeared, flickering into existence, as though the very game was alive and breathing. Welcome, Evelyn. You are now a part of the Bloodline's Lust. Your first dare will arrive soon. Don't keep us waiting. The words echoed in her mind, and she could almost hear a sinister laugh in the distance, as though someone had been waiting for her to take that step. The screen blinked again, and a new message flashed. Meet your first challenger. The game begins now. Suddenly her screen flickered to life with an image. A dark, cryptic figure obscured by shadow. The face was almost unrecognizable, but the glint of dark eyes glowed ominously beneath a hood. The figure's lips curled into a predatory grin. Let's begin, Evelyn. A chill ran through her body. Her heart raced as she realized the game was far more real than she had ever imagined. The boundaries of the world she knew were blurring, and she was standing on the precipice of something darker, something that promised to strip away everything she had once known. For the first time in her life, Evelyn felt a sense of power, a dangerous sense of power, and she couldn't wait to see where it would take her. The first dare, the room felt colder now, even though the window was shut tight. Evelyn sat at her desk, her hands still trembling from what had just occurred. The game was real. The invitation had been more than a sick joke. It was the beginning of something far more sinister. She stared at the screen, waiting for the next message, her pulse hammering in her throat. Suddenly, the screen blinked again and a new message appeared, the text glowing like blood-red ink. Dare number 1, claim your body, make yourself the object of desire, a public display, show us your submission. Evelyn's stomach churned, her first dare. The words echoed in her mind, and she could feel the weight of them. Public display, the idea alone, sent a shiver of unease through her body. This wasn't just a test of strength, of wit, or of endurance. This was a dare that demanded she expose herself in ways she never thought possible. The thought of it, the humiliation, the degradation, made her skin crawl. But then again, this was the game. Evelyn had been chosen. There was no turning back. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. She wanted to fight it. She wanted to run. But the truth clawed at her. The game was watching, waiting. If she didn't obey, there would be consequences far worse than failure. She didn't know how, but she knew the game had its claws in her now. A soft beep startled her. Another message arrived. Time is running out. Fail to complete your dare, and you will lose everything, your soul, your life, and worse, you'll be marked for eternity. A cold shiver ran through Evelyn's spine. The words hung heavy in the air, pressing down on her chest. She had no choice. She could already feel the pull, the dark energy that called her deeper into the game's grip. The twisted power she had longed for, even if it came with a price. The night stretched on as she sat in front of the screen, contemplating her options. She had no idea how to carry out the dare, but part of her, a part she had never fully acknowledged, knew she was ready to take the plunge. This game was cruel, it was twisted, but it was also liberating. A part of her had always wanted to break free from the constraints of society's expectations. This game, this deadly dance of lust and domination, gave her an outlet for her desires, but would it destroy her in the process? The screen beeped again, but this time it was accompanied by a countdown clock. You have 15 minutes to begin. Evelyn stood up abruptly, the weight of the dare sinking in. The seconds ticked away, and she felt the urge to act, to do something. She glanced at herself in the mirror. Beautiful, but now different. There was a hunger in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She ran her fingers through her hair, fixing her appearance until she looked almost like a stranger to herself. Her pulse quickened as the clock continued to count down. She couldn't wait anymore. Evelyn stood in front of the window, the lights of the city flashing in the distance. It was late. Most people were asleep, unaware of the dangerous game that was unfolding in the shadows. She took a deep breath, then slowly began to undress, her hands trembling as she removed each piece of clothing, exposing more of her skin to the cold air of the room. She wasn't just undressing. She was shedding her inhibitions, her humanity, her very sense of self. Every piece of fabric that fell to the floor was another step towards something darker. She wasn't just performing the dare, she was embracing it. When she was completely naked, she turned back to the screen. The countdown was almost up, and she could feel her heart racing in her chest. She could hear the whispers of the game in the back of her mind, urging her forward. It wasn't just about submission. It was about claiming herself in the most primal, raw way possible. Evelyn moved toward the center of the room, where the light from the window shone down, casting a harsh glow on her naked body. She raised her arms above her head, letting her body shine in the light. The game had demanded a public display, so she would give them one. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the rush of power. Power over her body, over the game, over the people who watched. The fear was still there, but it was masked by an overwhelming sense of control. As she stood there, exposed and vulnerable, her body became the prize. The game had already claimed her, but in this moment she would claim herself back. The screen flashed. Dare completed, 10 minutes remaining. Proceed with the next challenge. A feeling of relief washed over her, but it was fleeting. The challenge had been completed, but Evelyn knew this was only the beginning. The game would demand more from her. The next dare would be even more dangerous, more seductive, more brutal. But Evelyn was no longer the same person. Something inside her had shifted. The darkness of the game had awakened something she didn't know existed, a hunger she wasn't sure she could control. The seduction Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling of the game's presence in her mind. The dare she had just completed left her with a hollow sense of relief, but it was fleeting, easily consumed by the gnawing hunger for more. She had been forced to strip away her pride, her shame, and her clothing. She had danced on the edge of her desires, but it had been only the beginning. The game had claimed her, body and soul, and she could feel it. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of the haze that had settled over her. A message had arrived from the Bloodline's lust. Congratulations on completing dare number 1. Prepare yourself. Your next challenge will be one of choice. Trust no one, Evelyn. You'll be tested in ways you cannot yet imagine. The game is watching. Play carefully. The words on the screen sent a wave of unease through her body, but also a rush of excitement. There was something liberating about the chaos. The fear was intoxicating, urging her forward. She had no idea who or what was watching, but she could feel their eyes on her. Every move, every breath was being counted. The phone buzzed again. Another message. Meet your challenger. Damien awaits. Her pulse quickened as she read the words, her body reacting to them before she could fully comprehend the significance. Damien. He had been mentioned in the email, but this was different. He wasn't just a name, he was real, and the game had chosen him as her next challenge. It didn't take long for the doorbell to ring. Her heart skipped a beat. The moment had arrived. There was no time for hesitation, no space for doubt. The game had set its rules, and she was bound to follow them. Evelyn opened the door, and there he was. Damien stood in the doorway, tall, with an air of dominance that seemed to fill the room the moment he stepped inside. His eyes, dark and intense, locked onto hers immediately. The man radiated confidence, but there was something more in the way he looked at her, something that spoke of power, of control, and of something far darker. His lips curved into a smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "You must be Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth and hypnotic. "I've been waiting for you." The air between them thickened, charged with an electricity she could feel deep in her bones. He didn't wait for her invitation. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that seemed to echo in the stillness of the room. "I think we have a lot to discuss," Damien continued, his eyes scanning her form as though appraising her. "But before we do, let's see how far you're willing to go for this game." Evelyn's heart raced, her body already reacting to the raw intensity of his gaze. She wasn't sure if it was fear, lust, or something else entirely, but she could feel her body heating under his attention. The pull of desire was undeniable, and the game had made sure she couldn't resist. "Are you ready to begin?" Damien asked, his voice lowering, becoming almost a growl. The sexual tension was palpable, suffocating. Before she could respond, the phone buzzed once again, but this time the message was different. The screen flashed red. "Dare number 2. Damien is your partner, or he is your adversary. Make your choice, Evelyn. Will you surrender? Will you fight?" Evelyn's breath hitched. She knew that this wasn't a simple dare. This was a turning point. The game was forcing her to choose: submit to Damien or risk becoming his enemy. If she chose to fight, there would be consequences far darker than she could imagine. But if she chose to submit, she would be claiming something else, a dangerous, seductive power. She could feel it calling her, deep inside, an urge to surrender to the darkness. She glanced up at Damien, his eyes watching her with something akin to amusement. He knew the game's rules. He had played before, and from the way his lips curled in a slow, deliberate smile, Evelyn knew he wasn't about to make this easy for her. "I think you already know what you want, Evelyn," Damien said, his voice a whisper of silk and steel. "The game has chosen you. You know what you have to do." Her breath came in shallow gasps as she wrestled with herself. She was no longer sure where the game ended and where her own desires began. The boundaries were blurring, and she was no longer in control of the choices she made. The game had already claimed her body, her mind, and now it wanted her soul. The seconds stretched, the silence deafening. Then her voice broke through the stillness. "I choose," she began, but she couldn't finish the sentence. She wasn't sure what her choice would be, but it was clear. Whatever choice she made, it would change everything. Damien stepped closer, his presence consuming her. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face, his touch light but possessive. "You don't have to say anything, Evelyn," he murmured, his lips dangerously close to her ear. "I already know what you want." In one swift motion, he pulled her toward him, his body pressing against hers with a force that sent a shiver through her. The heat between them was unbearable, but it was more than just physical desire. It was something darker, something that seemed to twist her insides with every breath. "Submit to me," Damien whispered, his voice like velvet. "Give in to the game. Embrace what it offers you." Her body responded before her mind could catch up, her hands reaching up to grip his shoulders, pulling him closer. It was as if something inside her had snapped. A part of her she hadn't known existed, a need for control, for domination, for submission. And in that moment, she didn't care. The game was no longer just a game. It was her reality, and Damien was now her partner, her adversary, and perhaps something more. The game had begun to consume her, and she wasn't sure she wanted to stop it. Evelyn's heart thudded in her chest, but there was no turning back. Damien's touch still burned on her skin, the memory of his kiss lingering like a dangerous, intoxicating drug. The game's influence was becoming a part of her, seeping into her mind, her desires, and as much as she fought it, she could already feel the pull towards something darker, something more brutal. Damien, the man who had seduced her with his power, his touch, had only just begun to show her the true nature of the game. He wasn't just her challenger, he was an architect of the twisted world she now found herself in. His words, his promises were like poison, seeping into her veins, making her crave more. But now, The game was calling her again. Her phone buzzed, vibrating violently against the table, as if it knew the moment had arrived. Dare number 3, you've taken your first step. Now face the monsters. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as the screen flickered. The message continued. Tonight, you will meet your fellow players. Some of them will offer you temptation, others destruction. Choose wisely, Evelyn. There is no safe way out. Your soul is already at risk. The words burned into her mind, each sentence a challenge, each warning an invitation. There was no turning back. The game had already claimed her, and now she was being thrown into its true depths. The allure of power, of lust, had already corrupted her, but now it was time to face the consequences. Damien stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder as he watched her read the message. His gaze was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something darker in his eyes, something that sent a chill through Evelyn. She turned to face him, her stomach twisting with unease. "What's next?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien's lips curved into a slow, predatory smile. "You're about to meet the others, the ones who play this game as if it's their only reason for breathing. Some of them will seduce you, some will try to break you." He paused, his fingers tracing lightly down her arm, sending a shiver through her. "You have to decide which side you're on, Evelyn. Are you willing to embrace the darkness fully, or are you just playing at it?" Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat dry. The game's power seemed to pulse in her veins, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. She wasn't sure if she was prepared for what was coming, but she knew that once she stepped into the world of the game, there was no going back. Damien's hand tightened around her wrist, his grip firm, almost possessive. "Come," he said, "the game is waiting." They entered a darkened room, the air thick with tension. It smelled of perfume and decay, an intoxicating mixture of lust and death. The walls were adorned with strange, cryptic symbols, their meanings lost to Evelyn. The room was filled with a group of people, all standing in circles, whispering to one another in low, hushed tones. Their eyes flicked toward her as she entered, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. These weren't ordinary people. They were players, like her, chosen for the game. But there was something else in their eyes, something dangerous and predatory. Damien led her deeper into the room, his presence commanding attention. As they approached the center, Evelyn's gaze shifted from one player to the next. One man stood tall, his body muscular, his face half hidden by a black mask. His eyes gleamed with amusement, but there was a cruelty in them that sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine. Beside him was a woman, her lips painted red, her posture unnervingly still. Her gaze was icy, calculating, and Evelyn could feel the weight of her stare, as though she was evaluating Evelyn's worth in some twisted way. And then there was the man at the far side of the room. His eyes were dark, almost lifeless, his expression unreadable. But there was something about him that made Evelyn's heart race, something dark and magnetic. He was the one who would challenge her, who would push her further into the game. "This," Damien whispered into her ear, his voice low and intimate, "is where the real game begins. Here you'll be tested not only by your desires, but by your ability to survive. Choose your allies wisely, or you might find yourself consumed by them." Evelyn felt a cold shiver run through her, and she instinctively reached for Damien's hand, her fingers gripping his as she sought reassurance. But she knew deep down that the moment she had stepped into the game, she had already given up control. The choices she would make from here on out would define her fate. One by one, the other players approached her. The masked man, his movements deliberate, leaned in close. His breath was warm against her ear as he whispered, "I can show you how to survive this, but only if you're willing to trust me." Evelyn felt a surge of desire and fear at his words, but she held her ground. She wasn't here to be manipulated. But the lure of the game, of power, of pleasure, was too great to ignore. Next, the woman in red approached. Her eyes locked onto Evelyn's, and for a moment it felt as though time had slowed. "You'll need to prove yourself," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "This game doesn't reward the weak. It rewards the ones who are willing to break others to get what they want." Evelyn took a step back, her mind racing. She was already being pulled in different directions, the pressure mounting. Who could she trust? Who could she use to her advantage? And then the man with the lifeless eyes stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. There was a dangerous calm to him, and for a brief moment Evelyn saw something in his eyes, something that mirrored her own inner turmoil. "There's more to this game than just surviving," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "There are things that can be taken, and things that can never be returned." Evelyn stood there, surrounded by these players, their intentions cloaked in shadows. The game was no longer just about survival. It was about manipulation, lust, and betrayal. It was a game of trust and destruction. The stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined, and the monsters she was about to face weren't just physical. They were psychological, emotional, and sexual. Damien's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Remember," he said softly, his fingers brushing against her back, "the game will take everything from you. But if you're strong enough, you can take it all back." Evelyn's gaze shifted from player to player, her mind already working through the possibilities. She had no idea how far she was willing to go, but one thing was certain: this game would change her. And when it was over, there would be no going back. The room was suffocating, filled with an oppressive tension as Evelyn stood, trying to steady her breathing. The flickering lights above cast an eerie glow, emphasizing the dark, sharp angles of the faces surrounding her. The game was moving faster now, and the air was thick with promises and threats. Damien had pulled away, his presence still hauntingly close, but now distant in a way that unsettled her. His words echoed in her mind, "Choose your allies wisely, or be consumed by them." But Evelyn couldn't even be sure of who she could trust anymore. It wasn't just about survival, it was about power, and how far each player was willing to go to claim it. Her mind swirled with confusion, and she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone in this room was playing a much deeper game than she was aware of. The seductive allure of Damien had been intoxicating. His touch, his words, they made her feel alive in ways she never expected. But there was something darker about him, something predatory. The phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with another dare. Evelyn's breath hitched as she glanced down. Dare number 4. A choice must be made: betray the one closest to you or be betrayed yourself. The trust you've built will now either destroy you or empower you. The game demands sacrifice. Her heart skipped a beat. Betrayal. The word hung in the air like a specter, and Evelyn felt a knot form in her stomach. The message was clear. Someone had to lose, someone had to be sacrificed. The thought made her stomach churn, her mind racing as she tried to process it. She could almost feel the game's eyes on her, watching her every move, every breath, every hesitation. Damien's voice broke through her thoughts. His voice was low, teasing, almost as if he were playing with her, leading her down a path she didn't know if she could come back from. "I suppose we both know the price of trust now, don't we, Evelyn?" He stepped closer, and his hand brushed against hers, a silent, deliberate contact that sent shivers down her spine. "You've already made a choice, whether you realize it or not." Evelyn glanced up at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. What did he mean? Had she already chosen without even realizing it? The weight of the dare pressed down on her. She was being pushed into a corner, forced to make a decision that would shape her destiny. There was no escaping it. The other players in the room watched silently, as if waiting for her to make her move. Each of them had their own eyes on her, calculating, plotting, waiting for her to falter. She turned away from Damien, walking toward the center of the room. The darkness pressed in closer, the silence deafening. She could feel it now, the pull of the game, the seductive temptation to betray. She wasn't just a participant anymore. She was being shaped, molded into something darker, something dangerous. The desire for power, the rush of taking control, was intoxicating. Damien's words from earlier rang in her mind. "Choose wisely, Evelyn. Betray or be betrayed." The decision was tearing at her. The game was about to reveal its true face. How far could she push herself before she became something unrecognizable? She turned back to face him, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't want to betray him. Not yet. But could she trust him? Could she afford to? She glanced around at the others, some of them eyeing her with interest, others with thinly veiled disdain. The choice felt inevitable. Betrayal was coming. But who would be the victim? As if reading her thoughts, Damien smiled, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. He stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate. His hand brushed her cheek gently, and for a moment, Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her, a strange sense of intimacy. "You have to understand, Evelyn," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. Betrayal is not always about being cruel. Sometimes it's about survival, and sometimes it's about taking what you want, no matter the cost. His words settled in her chest like a stone, weighing her down, making her heart beat faster. His lips were so close to hers, and she could feel the pull of him, the darkness of his influence wrapping around her. The game had set its trap, and now she was caught in its web. Damien kissed her, soft at first, but then with a growing intensity, as though he were staking his claim. Evelyn let herself go for a moment, lost in the sensation, the dark passion, the power. The kiss was both comforting and terrifying. But when he pulled away, there was something different in his eyes, something colder. He wasn't just seducing her, he was playing his own game, and now she was in it, deep. Evelyn's phone buzzed once more, this time with a message from the game. She opened it, her breath catching as she read the words, "Your decision must be made. Betray the one you trust, or the consequences will be dire. You have 10 minutes. Her blood ran cold. The countdown was on. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. If she hesitated, she'd be destroyed. The game was forcing her hand, and there was no room for mercy. Damien's smile widened, but it was no longer playful. It was calculated, as if he knew exactly what was happening, as though he had expected this. "I think it's time you decide, Evelyn," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "The game is ruthless, but it's also freeing, don't you think? You don't have to hold back. You can do whatever it takes to win." Evelyn's heart raced, but her gaze never left Damien. He had played her. He had seduced her, manipulated her, and now he was watching her crumble under the weight of the decision. The game had tested her in ways she never expected, and now she had to make a choice. The room felt like it was closing in, the pressure mounting, the clock ticking down. Her hands shook as she stared at Damien, torn between what she knew was right and what the game demanded. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had already lost herself to the game. The question now was, who would she betray? Damien or someone else? Evelyn stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was thick with tension. The game had taken everything from her sense of control, her peace, and now it was demanding something darker. The next dare was clear: submit or face the consequences. The message had been blunt, but the challenge was one she hadn't expected. Damien's voice broke through her thoughts. "You don't have to fight this, Evelyn," he said, his tone soft but laced with authority. "Submission isn't weakness, it's strength. Embrace it. Let the game consume you. Become more." Her breath caught. The weight of his words pressed against her, but she couldn't ignore the pulse of desire that ran through her veins. Her body ached with the need to give in, to let go of the fight she'd been holding on to, but a flicker of fear held her back. What would she lose if she surrendered completely? "You have 10 minutes, Evelyn," Damien whispered, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw, pulling her attention back to him. His touch was electric, and it stirred something deep inside her, something she was no longer sure she could control. The screen flashed, the message more urgent than before. Dare number 5. Submit to Damien's will. Surrender your body. Surrender your soul. Evelyn's legs wobbled as she took a step forward, toward him. The decision was hers, and she knew there would be no turning back. She could feel the power of submission wrapping around her like chains. But in this moment, it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like freedom. Damien's lips brushed against her ear, his breath hot and dangerous. "Give yourself to me, Evelyn. Let go. Become mine." With one final breath, Evelyn let herself surrender. The game had already taken so much, but this time it wasn't about survival. It was about embracing what it wanted her to become. The devil's descent. Evelyn felt the air in the room shift, thickening with something ancient, something far darker than the game itself. Damien's presence, once intoxicating, now seemed small compared to the figure that loomed behind him. A shadow cast itself over her, heavy, oppressive. The devil had entered the game. Damien stepped back, his expression unreadable as the figure in the doorway came into full view. The devil was tall, his dark silhouette bathed in a deep crimson light that seemed to burn from within. His eyes glowed with an intense fiery red, and Evelyn felt her body react to the power emanating from him, even though every instinct screamed for her to run. "You've come far, Evelyn," the devil said, his voice smooth, deep, and laced with malice. "But this game, it's just the beginning. You've learned to submit to desire. Now you will learn to own your power." Evelyn's body trembled as she met his gaze. She had felt the game twist her, but this was something else entirely. The devil wasn't here to play by any rules. He was here to claim her. He moved toward her, every step deliberate, as if the very ground beneath his feet obeyed him. "You think you've given yourself away, but you've only just begun to understand what it means to be mine," he whispered, his breath hot against her skin. The room seemed to close in on her. She wanted to resist, she wanted to scream, to run. But the devil's words, his promise, pulled her in deeper. There was no escaping the lure of the power he offered. Her body responded before her mind could comprehend, and for a moment she found herself wanting him. "You've played your part," he said, "but now it's time for you to truly belong to me." Evelyn's heart raced as she stood face to face with the devil. The weight of his presence pressing against her chest, the air was thick with power, and she could feel the dark energy in the room, curling around her like a physical force. The game had taken her further than she had ever imagined, and now it was time for her to confront the ultimate test. The devil's gaze was intense, his red eyes burning through her, as if he could see every inch of her soul. "You've come so far, Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth and rich with power. "But there's one final test, one last dare." Evelyn felt a shiver run down her spine. She was already lost, but something in her, something dark and hungry, was pulling her forward. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling both with fear and anticipation. The devil's smile was cruel, full of dark promise. "You will face the final dare with Damien. You will fight. Not just for survival, but for control. Only one of you can emerge victorious. The other will be claimed." The words hung heavy in the air, and Evelyn's body tensed. The game had always been about power, but this was different. It was no longer about simply playing. It was about taking everything she had learned and using it to break the other person. Damien, who had once seduced her, now stood as her final opponent. Damien stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers, his expression unreadable. For the first time since they had met, Evelyn saw something vulnerable in him, something almost human, but she quickly pushed the thought away. There was no room for weakness in this game, no room for anything other than pure, unrelenting power. "You've come far, Evelyn," Damien said, his voice low and dangerous. "But this is where it ends. One of us will win, and the other will fall." The tension in the room was unbearable as Evelyn faced Damien. The room had transformed into an arena, dim, foreboding, and charged with dark energy. Shadows danced around them, the walls closing in as if the game itself was watching, waiting. Evelyn's body tensed, ready for the fight. Her mind was clouded with lust, power, and the sharp sting of betrayal. Damien's gaze never wavered as they circled each other, the air crackling with the energy of the final dare. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She had become something else in this game, something darker, something more dangerous. She was no longer just a pawn, she was a player, and in this game, only the strongest survived. The first strike came quickly, almost too fast for Evelyn to react. Damien lunged, his body moving with a predatory grace, and for a moment, she hesitated. But that hesitation was all it took. He grabbed her, pulling her into an embrace that was both violent and intimate. His lips crashed against hers, demanding submission, but this time Evelyn fought back. She didn't want to submit, she wanted to dominate. Their bodies collided in a frenzy of lust and violence, their hands moving over each other with a brutal intensity. The game was no longer just about surviving. It was about claiming victory, about asserting control. The air was thick with sweat, the scent of desire mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Evelyn's nails dug into Damien's skin as she fought back, pushing him away with a force that surprised even herself. She had become stronger in the game, more ruthless. She could feel the power coursing through her veins, and for the first time she realized that it wasn't just the game that had changed her. It was her. She was the one who had embraced the darkness, the violence, and the lust. And now she would take everything she had learned to defeat Damien. The battle raged on, a mix of passion and brutality that blurred the lines between pleasure and pain. Each movement was deliberate, each strike laced with desire and malice. But as the fight wore on, Evelyn felt herself growing stronger. The game had pushed her to the brink, but she was no longer afraid. She had become the game. Damien's breath was ragged as he finally pulled away, blood dripping from a gash on his cheek. He stared at her, his eyes full of admiration and something darker, something more dangerous. "You're not the same person I met, Evelyn," he said, his voice low. "You've become something else. Something I can't control." Evelyn stood over him, her chest rising and falling with exertion. She looked down at him, her eyes filled with cold determination. "You never controlled me, Damien." "Not really. The game did. And now I control it." She took a step forward, her hand outstretched. The final strike was swift, decisive. Damien's body fell to the floor, lifeless. A final reminder that in this game, there were no second chances. Evelyn stood over him, her breath steady but her heart pounding. She had won. But there was no satisfaction, no triumph. Only a dark emptiness that seemed to consume her from within. The game had taken everything from her, her innocence, her humanity, and now it had taken Damien. She had emerged victorious, but at what cost? The devil's voice echoed in her mind, cold and triumphant. "You have completed the final dare, Evelyn. You are mine." Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the game settle over her like a shroud. She had won, but in the end, there was no victory. There was only the devil's claim and the eternal darkness that came with it. Evelyn stood at the edge of the dark arena, the remnants of the battle with Damien still lingering in her body. Her skin was slick with sweat, her muscles aching from the violence of the game, but her mind was sharp. She had fought and won, but victory came at a steep price. The darkness had consumed her more than she realized. The room around her pulsed with the same oppressive energy, the same eerie red light that signaled the presence of the devil. The walls seemed to close in on her, suffocating her, and the air was thick with anticipation. This wasn't the end. No, the final battle wasn't over. There was still one more test, one final moment where Evelyn would have to prove just how far she was willing to go. Her heart raced as she turned to face the center of the room. The devil's eyes glowed with that eternal fire, burning with an intensity that made her feel small, insignificant in his presence. But she didn't back down. She couldn't. The game had already shaped her into something else, something she couldn't walk away from, not anymore. The devil stood before her, his tall, imposing figure filling the space with his presence. "Congratulations, Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth and predatory. "You've surpassed all my expectations. You've played my game and won. But now it's time to claim your prize." She felt the air shift as the final dare materialized on the screen before her. "The time has come for you to claim what you have earned, Evelyn. Your prize is not just power, it is me. Will you fully surrender to the darkness, or will you fight me one last time? Choose." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She had faced so many trials, so many temptations, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about complete submission to the devil himself. She could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on her. Surrender meant losing herself, becoming his puppet. But fighting meant risking everything, the power, the control, the lust that had so completely overtaken her. "Choose, Evelyn," the devil repeated, his voice low and coaxing. "You have already given so much. Now you will either accept me fully or defy me. The choice is yours." She glanced around the room, the faces of other players flashing in her mind, those who had come before her, who had either fallen or been consumed by the game. She had seen what submission looked like: power, control, freedom. But she had also seen the price, the cost of losing herself in the devil's grasp. For the first time since the game began, Evelyn hesitated. The pull of the darkness was strong, but so was the faint glimmer of the woman she once was. The desire to defy the devil, to prove that she still had control, fought against the part of her that wanted to surrender completely. The devil stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You want to fight me, don't you? To take everything I've given you and throw it back in my face? But Evelyn, You can't escape. The game is over. You've already made your choice. The temptation to give in, to embrace the dark power that had corrupted her, nearly overwhelmed her. But deep down, Evelyn knew the truth. She had changed. The game had taken everything from her, and now she would either become its master or be its victim. There was no middle ground. With a final breath, Evelyn took a step toward the devil, her body trembling as the air around her crackled with dark energy. "I choose you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The devil's eyes flashed with dark satisfaction. "Wise choice, Evelyn. You are mine now, body and soul." The moment her words left her lips, Evelyn felt the darkness consume her entirely. The world around her shifted, her body pulsing with power that burned through her veins like fire. The devil's presence enveloped her, and she felt herself surrender completely to the game, to the eternal darkness that had claimed her. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur as the final transformation began. Evelyn's body glowed with an unholy light, her skin marked with the symbols of the game, her eyes glowing with an eerie red hue. She was no longer just a player. She was a part of the game itself, bound by the rules of the devil's creation. "You've won, Evelyn," the devil said, his voice now both triumphant and possessive. "But in doing so, you've become my eternal prize. Welcome to your new reality." Evelyn stood before him, her body pulsing with power, her soul forever bound to the game. She had been claimed not just by the devil, but by the game itself. The choice had been made, and there was no going back. The devil reached out, his hand resting gently on her cheek. "You were always meant for this, Evelyn. Now we will reign together forever." As his lips descended on hers, Evelyn felt herself disappear into the darkness, her body and soul becoming part of the game's twisted legacy. The final battle had been fought, and in the end she had chosen to belong to the devil, her soul forever his. Evelyn stood at the precipice of everything she had become. The room around her pulsed with a sinister rhythm, the shadows stretching across the walls like living creatures. She was no longer the woman who had stepped into the game, a naive, uncertain soul. No, she'd been molded by the game, twisted by its darkness, and now she stood as its ultimate creation. Her body hummed with a dark power, one that flowed through her veins and thrummed beneath her skin. The marks of the game, symbols of possession, were etched into her flesh, glowing with an eerie crimson light. Her eyes, once human, now glowed with the same unnatural red as the devil's. She was no longer herself. She had become something else entirely. The devil stood behind her, his presence overwhelming, consuming. His dark laughter filled the air, deep and resonant, as though the very world bent to his will. "You've done well, Evelyn," he said, his voice a velvet whisper. "You've embraced your power, your lust, your submission, and now you belong to me, body, soul, and everything in between." She felt his hand on her shoulder, warm and possessive, a constant reminder of her new reality. The game had taken everything from her, but in return it had given her power, the power to command, to control, to seduce. And it had bound her to the devil, not as a victim, but as a queen in his dark empire. The game had changed her in ways she couldn't have predicted. It had awakened something inside her, an insatiable hunger for more power, more control, and perhaps most terrifying of all, more of the devil himself. Evelyn turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his with a fierceness that had not been there before. "I've won, devil," she whispered, her voice low and filled with dark promise. "But you're not the only one who controls this game." The devil's eyes narrowed, his smile spreading wider. Ah, so you finally learned. You've become more than just a player, Evelyn. You've become a part of me, but remember, he added, stepping closer, his breath hot against her skin, in this world, power comes at a price. And now you're mine. She could feel his presence seep into her, wrapping around her like chains, but it no longer terrified her. It was no longer an act of submission. It was a partnership, one built on dominance, lust, and the power they shared. With a slow, deliberate movement, Evelyn reached out and traced her fingers along his chest, feeling the heat of him beneath the dark fabric. The power between them was palpable, a crackling force that filled the air. She could feel the game's essence, the dark energy that had pulled her deeper into its grip, merging with her own. She was no longer just a pawn in his game. She was the game's queen. The game doesn't end with me, Evelyn said, her voice steady, confident. I'm not the same person I was when I entered. You've made me a part of this world, and now I'll take my place beside you. But don't think you control me, devil. I'm no longer just yours. The devil's eyes gleamed with approval, a wicked smile tugging at his lips. No, Evelyn. Now you and I are one. Together we'll rule this dark world. You, my queen, and me, your king. Evelyn's lips curved into a slow, dark smile. She had made her choice, and she had chosen power. She had chosen control. She had chosen the devil. But in the end, she was the one who would reshape the game. With a final lingering kiss, the devil sealed their bond. His lips tasted of fire, of eternity, and Evelyn knew that this was just the beginning. She had become more than just a player. She was the game's master. And now, together with the devil, they would rule it for all eternity.